Let's talk about some running back start sits. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them right now. A lot of guys.
It gets tougher and tougher every week, man.
A lot of guys on the bubble. We got injuries. We got bye weeks. The bye weeks knocked out a lot of our safe options like James Robinson, like David Johnson, even some options like Antonio Gibson. So we're getting deeper and deeper. And then we're seeing Chris Carson get injured last week. Phillip Lindsay's in concussion protocol. And injuries left and right just keep hitting for these RBs. So fantasy managers need to know how to treat these backfields. And there's a couple of them that we want to talk about here that are kind of these ambiguous backfields where there's a couple different options. Let's go through some of these. The first one is in San Francisco. I don't even know what's happening. There's nothing to even say here. There's no analytic metric that we can look at that's going to tell us who to start on a weekly basis. And right now it seems like it's between Jerrick McKinnon, JaMycal Hasty, Tevin Coleman could be back. He was activated off of IR, but no guarantee he's going to play against Seattle here in week 8. Alex, who do you like out of these guys?
Dude, this is crazy. If possible, I'm trying to avoid San Francisco because the writing on the wall was there for Jerrick McKinnon last week. I mean, I started him in a couple leagues, and he came back with negative fantasy points. I think it was like 3 carries for -1 yards, and it made no sense. All game, I'm like, did I miss a play and he left for the game? Is he inactive? Did he get disciplined? And then Kyle Shanahan comes out after the game, and all he says is like, oh, yeah, we were just trying to rest him. Like, that would have been great to know beforehand, Kyle. But, you know, I just can't trust him at this point, and if I'm going to start anyone, honestly, it's going to be JaMycal Hasty, which sounds a little bit crazy, but I think he is the one that's guaranteed for a role in the offense this week. Like, Jerrick McKinnon is clearly not going to come in and have some sort of bell cow work like Jeff Wilson did last week with no one coming in behind him. Tevin Coleman, even if he's active, I don't expect him to just come out and get 20 carries after coming off of IR and being questionable throughout the week. So I think JaMycal Hasty is probably the best bet for some sort of workload if you're desperate. But if possible, I'm trying to stay away from all these guys.
I'm with you on Hasty, especially if Coleman doesn't play. But yeah, I mean, throw the GIF on screen right now. Mark Cuban saying, I'm out in the Shark Tank for JaMycal Hasty. Like 23% of snaps, 8.3 fantasy points. If that's your best option in a backfield, you probably don't want any of them. And at this point, like, I'm willing to say Shanahan running back rooms, at least for the rest of this year, probably going into next year's drafts. Like, I'm just not going to touch any of them outside of maybe Raheem Mostert, and he's going to be a year older next season. Hopefully he comes back and healthy off IR, because I think that's the only guy that you can actually trust to start in fantasy. But let's talk about another running back here, La'Mical Perine for the New York Jets, kind of stepping up into a workhorse role. He's up against Kansas City, which is middle of the road against the running back position. I'm willing to throw La'Mical Perine in there as a desperation RB2 this week, maybe even a flex. Do you think that's a hot take?
I mean, desperate times call for desperate measures, Steph. And like with Perine, sadly, I think I might play him over all the San Francisco running backs just because of the uncertainty. And here's the thing. A San Francisco running back will outscore La'Mical Perine this week. Maybe 2 of them will. I just don't know who it's going to be. So I'm taking La'Mical Perine even though he's on a bad offense. I mean, the Jets, they're going to score a maximum of 10 points per game. So the touchdown upside isn't there, although he did have one last game. But he's getting some red zone carries. He's getting most of the passing work on that team over Frank Gore. It's really just him and Frank Gore in that backfield right now. And against the Chiefs, I expect them to get absolutely boat raced in this game. I think the line is like 20 points or something like that. So Perine's going to be out there. And although Darnold doesn't check down to the running back a ton, who knows that, if Perine can get 10 to 12 carries and 5 or 6 targets in this game, even if the production isn't there, the volume could be enough to make him a flex play. So again, I'm fading if I can, but with some of these injuries, with some of the bye weeks, with some of these crazy backfields that we're seeing, I'm fine to roll Perine out there, and it doesn't feel good.
70% of snaps last week, 13.6 fantasy points, 11 attempts for 40 rushing yards, a brutal 3.6 yards per attempt. So like you're saying, the production here, unless you get a touchdown, which, I mean, Perine had 3 red zone carries, so it looks like, it's not Frank Gore cramming up the middle anymore. And if there is going to be receiving work to be had, that's going to go to Perine as well. So I see him as a low-end RB2, just as a volume play on this bad offense. If the Jets improve at all, I don't think they're going to fire Gase. They would have already done it if they were going to this season. But if whatever happens, maybe the personnel changes, the scheme changes, whatever, like there's nowhere to go for this Jets offense but up. So in that case, for a guy that even if you don't have to start him, keep him stashed on your bench. I think he's a fine bye week filler or a deep flex.
So next on the list, Stef, another split backfield. I think some of the themes here with our start sits this week are some of these split backfields, and we've talked about like Darrell Henderson and Malcolm Brown a lot in the past. So we're trying to hit on some of these new ones that are starting to pop up left and right. And this one's Justin Jackson and Josh Kelly. Another backfield that's been incredibly tough to read. Without Eckler that first week, Justin Jackson seemed to lead the backfield. But then last week, Josh Kelly, 47% of snaps and 17 touches, to Jackson's 38% of snaps and only 10 touches. They're playing the Denver Broncos, who are a little bit stingy against the running back position. Steph, Kelly and Jackson, if you had them as your RB2 or your flex last week, neither popped off, but they got the job done. Both had over 10 PPR fantasy points. Are you willing to roll out either of them this week or potentially both?
I've tried not to start Kelly with every fiber of my being, just because he's been the between the tackles grinder type of guy in that offense.
Without a touchdown, it's pretty tough for him to put up a worthy performance, that's for sure.
Exactly. I mean, 47% of snaps, that was more than Justin Jackson. Well, I'll talk about him in a second. 17 touches last week, 12 for 29 rushing. Like, that's just a brutal rushing efficiency. And I think that's going to continue in a blizzard game against Denver, which is third against running backs. He did see some receiving volume, this is where the interesting upside lies for Joshua Kelly. 5 for 5 for 24 receiving yards. If you're going to start him, that's what you have to circle and say, look, I'm going to expect for that receiving volume to be there again. The thing is, the Chargers are coming off a game against Jacksonville, which actually turned into a little bit of a shootout. I don't expect that same game script to occur here against Denver. I think the Chargers will be able to stifle them a little bit more on the defensive side. And so with that, I'm going to go Justin Jackson if I have to pick one of the two. I was already leaning that way because Justin Jackson is proven to be Austin Eckler light. Only played 38% of snaps. He was banked up in the week last week, so they didn't. I felt like they were trying to limit his touches a little bit. Had 5 for 12 rushing, but had one more target than Joshua Kelly. He had 6, caught 5 of them for 43 yards. So also saw more efficiency in the receiving game as well. And that just is part of his profile. That's who he is. He can definitely play more of a scat back or third down back than Joshua Kelly can. I'm taking Justin Jackson in this game, trying to sit Joshua Kelly, but really don't feel great about either one of them against Denver.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to that point, though, like, compared to LaMichael Perine, Jerrick McKinnon, JaMychal Hasty, even Tevin Coleman, I think I might still rather have either Justin Jackson or Josh Kelly. You might disagree with me there, but I'm with you. If I had to go with one, I'm going with Jackson, because with Kelly, you're essentially relying on a touchdown. And with Justin Jackson, I think the floor is safer with that passing game work. So if I had to pick, it's going to be Jackson. But again, desperate times call for desperate measures. So I'm willing to flex either of them in a pinch and hope for the best.
Let's move over to Buffalo and talk about Zach Moss and Devin Singletary for this Bills running back room. Singletary played 54% of snaps to Zach Moss's 47%. Both had 10 touches, so it was almost a dead even 50-50 split in that backfield. And Moss outproduced Singletary coming back from that injury. I feel like he was kind of getting eased in a little bit, and then we saw some production there. Who are you taking in Week 8 against New England?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's not Devin Singletary. There's no way you can start him right now. I mean, now that Zach Moss is back and healthy, we both liked Zach Moss coming into the season. We didn't know if the breakout was going to happen. We thought it might be a timeshare, but it looks like Zach Moss is truly starting to emerge and really take over this backfield because of those snap counts and touches from last week. And Singletary straight up hasn't been good. You look at his last 3 games from a fantasy points perspective, 4.3, 5.5, and 6.7. Just hasn't been able to get anything going on the ground. And this is a Patriots team that just gave up 4 touchdowns to the running back position against San Francisco. So if I'm going to start one of them, I mean, this might be a hot take, but I think it's going to be Zach Moss. He offers some upside in the receiving game as well. He's the more likely of the two, in my opinion, to be in at the goal line, even though Josh Allen's probably going to keep it on the read option every time or QB sneak it. So the touchdown upside is low, but if I had to pick one of these two guys, I think the pendulum has swung and it's Zach Moss for me.
Now, their last game was against the Jets, so I don't want to overvalue some of that, but if you look at Zach Moss's efficiency on the ground, 6.7 yards per attempt, had 7 carries for 47 yards, to Singletary, who actually had one more attempt, 8, but only had 29 rushing yards, 3.6 yards per attempt there. So Zach Moss is kind of coming in as like, here's the fresh legs. Let me see if I can come in here and take over this backfield. I think there is a small window that is opening for Moss to sneak in here and take over, but as long as this is a 50-50 split, I'd rather start neither of them.
Last one here, Steph, at the running back position. You have this choice this week against me, so I'm not going to show my cards too much, but J.K. Dobbins against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's a tough one because Ingram is potentially going to be out for this game. And it's like, of course, the one game that Ingram is finally poised to potentially miss or be limited is against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have been absolutely suffocating against the run. Only 68 rushing yards allowed per game. You know Gus Edwards is going to be involved in some way. Lamar Jackson's going to run it as well. J.K. Dobbins against Pittsburgh. Are you firing him up this week, Steph?
I'm not going to answer that question directly in terms of our matchup. I mean, I got to decide between J.K. Dobbins and then DJ Dallas. I'm kind of holding him, seeing how it shakes out with Carlos Hyde and Travis Homer. It's just a tough spot to be in. I really don't want to start him, but I think he has enough of a floor through his receiving to not even be a starter, but just that I would probably plug him in because I think he's going to be in that 8 to 10 point range. I don't think he's going to be efficient on the ground. If you remember against Cincinnati, Dobbins had one rushing attempt for 34 yards. So a 34 yard per attempt in that game. Yeah. So that's kind of skewing some of his efficiency metrics. He hasn't looked that great on the ground when he's getting close to double-digit carries, and I don't expect that to explode against Pittsburgh, though I do love Dobbins long-term. I think he can be great. He has been efficient through the air, and that's where all of this is going to come from. If you're starting J.K. Dobbins this week, what you're hoping for is for the Pittsburgh Steelers to go up on this Ravens team and for them to enter comeback mode, have to air it out a little bit more. But the most we've seen from a target perspective for Dobbins is 4 targets. Maybe at absolute most, you're seeing 6 in a game script that lends itself to that. I mean, he was 4 for 4 through the air for 38 yards. Against Kansas City, similar type of game script that we could see here if Pittsburgh really is this undefeated juggernaut that they've been thus far. Coming off the bye week, maybe they look at some of the efficiency and big plays that Dobbins has had throughout the season and try to give him the ball a little bit more with Ingram out. I don't think you can bank on that at all. I think everyone's going to play their role, right? Gus Edwards is going to be the between the tackles grinder, and J.K. Dobbins is going to be more of a scat back, change of pace, breather back. So really, I'd rather start Edwards actually over J.K. Dobbins. Are you with me on that one?
That's a bit of a hot take. I would try to avoid either in this matchup. If you held J.K. Dobbins to this point, it feels like a situation where you should start him. It's just such a tough matchup. We don't know what it's going to look like. We need to see if Ingram plays or not first. But I would rather wait and see. I know you could wait and he could have a good game and Ingram could be back next week, but there's just so much risk involved there. I think a lot of people are going to start him if Ingram is out, but it feels like a trap game to me. I'd love to be proved wrong. You know, me and you love J.K. Dobbins as a talent. We think he's going to have a great career, but I'm going to try to sit him this week if possible.
Coming off that season high 11 touches in week 6, but even 11 touches is just not going to do it. So you think in a best case scenario, maybe he gets a little bit more than that, but still not a guy that you really want to plug in there. If you're looking at it as a flex option, there's probably a wide receiver out on the waiver wire that you can pick up and just plug in for 1 week and stream.